Hello. Yeah. Hey, folks. Ah, I'm even live. Ha. Works. Hey, folks. Let me know if you're there. I'm just waiting for Brian also to join our call, and then we will discuss LiveView Native and maybe code a little bit together. Let's see. I got my phone here and everything. Hello. Thanks for joining. Hope you're doing fine. How are you doing today? Almost weekend, eh? So that's exciting. Yeah, I'm just setting up my phone here. Let's see. Okay. Bezel. Apply visual effects. Interesting. Yeah, thanks. LVN is exciting indeed. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, you can hear me, but the call can't hear me yet. But yeah, I like Life Native too. Like, still we need to write a lot of Swift code, which was surprising to me. But it's okay. Like, Elixir still makes it very easy to just like create an application, update an application, that kind of stuff. Yeah, let's see. Ooh, I'm in a spaceship. Let's see what Brian has to say. All right, I'm in a spaceship with a tent with a. Oh, there you go. Yeah, those aren't that great though. All right. What is happening? Moonlight. Oh wow, fun. I should do this all the time. Was this a strawberry? Oh, I'm a talking strawberry now. That's hilarious. All right, I think I think I will use this filter. It can also be puppy. Okay. Oh man, this is amazing. Cool. I can also give myself a second, like, yeah, if I don't have a hat ready, now I have a cool trot hat. Yeah, awesome. Oh wow, it's a whole 3D thing. Oh, what's happening here? I don't know. Okay. No, I like the strawberry the best. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Oh man, this is fun. This is too much fun. Yeah, I'm just waiting for uh I'm just waiting for Brian to join. Here we go. That's me. All right. Yeah, and how you doing? Everything all right? Restream. This is running, I think. Hey. Excellent. Have you switched to Blue Sky yet? You should all follow me in Blue Sky. We should all just move from Twitter over to Blue Sky. That would be great. Yeah, also don't forget that next week, Membrane is going to have their live streaming week where they have really exciting stuff coming up, like Jose, for example, he's talking. Chris McCord is also talking. Let's see the 2024 agenda. No, that's a conference they're hosting. But where's it here? Membrane stream. Where's the live streaming week? Right. Okay. Brian isn't here yet. Sorry about that. He's a little delayed. He just dropped off his kids at school, and now is trying to set up his audio whatever setup. But hang on, where's the live streaming thing? Come on. Organizer. Yeah, this one, the stream week. It's from WebRTC. This one, yeah. So next week it's gonna be the Membrane stream week. I can highly recommend it. Go check it out. It's free. It's right here. Jose is gonna talk on Monday. That's gonna be exciting. Then Mateusz, one of the creator of Membrane, actually, he's gonna talk about Boombox, which we've used for our previous project. Then Chris McCord is live coding a Twitch clone. So, but he's using WebRTC, not what we use. We use Boombox and like an RTMP and HLS stream. We got Jonathan, creator of Livebook, so it's going to be interesting as well. And we got my good friend and ex-colleague Felipe. He's talking about real-time at Superbase, which is also very exciting because they have a lot of people. Yeah, I'm just waiting for Brian here. No. They have a lot of people using real-time, and all of that is powered by Elixir, so that's exciting too. Yeah. So that is next week. I think you can also sign up for updates here, although I haven't received any yet. Maybe they're in the spam folder, I don't know. But yeah, they do have some emails there. But yeah, next Monday, 7 p.m. All right, that's Brian. Let's... Hello.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Brian.
Give me just a moment.
No problem.
Do my headphones.
No problem.
Hold on.
Yeah, no worries. I'm also dialing in still the audio levels here. Also, question to the chat. Let me know when you can, whether you can or cannot hear Brian when he talks. It should work, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. I got 4 people on YouTube. Hello to YouTube. Should work, but I'm not 100% sure. All right. 1 person on Twitch. Hello to Twitch. Of course, 35 people on Twitter. I don't believe that.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, I think I may go without video.
Okay, sure.
Might just be easier.
Yeah. All right. So let me see. Yeah, how you doing, Brian?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. All right, I think the chat can hear you. That's great. Well, thanks for joining me today. We wanted to talk about LiveView Native a little bit, right? We played around with it on Monday and already got quite far. And my understanding is you watched the live stream afterwards. And yeah, so just from watching the live stream, like how did you feel about LiveView Native and what you created over there?
I mean, as as someone that's been attached to it for this long, it's always good to see people start to use and adopt it.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt some of the kind of like blockers you were running into.
Yeah.
And I was like, just do this while I was watching it. And I was like, okay, yeah, we could probably be improving parts of the documentation. That's fine. I think that there's, you know, a big part of like LiveView Native's adoption story, I believe, is just a fundamental educational process on what it is we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Because from what I understand, I've heard that there are a few other like big FANG companies that have done some server-driven UI on
Mm-hmm.
native,
Mm-hmm.
but no one's released a framework like this, and nobody has kind of formalized it in a way that we have.
Right.
So one of the things that you said, I took timestamps so we can go back if you wanted to like play back your video, but I just want to be able to like reference certain things.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
But there was let me just hold on. My organization, my timestamps isn't great.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Where was it? Okay, so at like 57:39, you said exactly what it is that we're hoping people walk away from LiveView Native was, which is you said it seems like web development, but it's not. And that's
Right.
exactly what we're aiming for. That's the design of LiveView Native, because we're not trying to reinvent everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't like one of the earlier versions, actually up until about almost a year ago, LiveView Native was a very different framework.
Mm-hmm.
It was not achieving the goals that I had set out for it to achieve, which is that a live view, someone that is experienced building live view applications should be able to easily start building live view native applications,
Right.
because we were just kind of using live view for a little bit of the state management stuff, but all the organization of the templates and how those got rendered, there's all these deviations on how layouts were being rendered that just was not, it was atypical for how you're used to doing it in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm. In what
And
way?
So first of all, we got a PR. Well, Jose wrote a PR for LiveView that I think was sitting there since about 4 or 5 months prior to us using it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called Render With. What that does is in the on mount hooks for a LiveView,
Mm-hmm.
you can declare a function reference
Okay.
and say, instead of using render one, like inside this live view, you're going to use this other function reference to actually delegate rendering to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a huge thing that we needed unlocked, because otherwise everything was happening inside the same live view.
Right. I see.
And you would have we would be doing pattern matching like out of the assigns
Mm-hmm.
in the render function. And for some people, they're like, oh yeah, that's easy, that's nice and light. But and this is I won't like reference the timestamp on this, but you did kind of raise the question on why it is we have so many templates for different things. Like why is it that we have a format folder like Swift UI that the
Mm-hmm.
templates are going into, instead of the templates sitting alongside the live the render component?
Exactly.
And the reason for that is because live view is hard coded for HTML,
Mm-hmm.
and like through and through. And I've been trying to like push and nudge and get that relaxed as much as I can get away with. But imagine this for a moment. Like you have your live view, and then you have a template for HTML. You have a template for Swift UI. But then you have a Swift UI iOS, like iPhone template. You have an
Mm-hmm.
iPad template. You have an Apple TV template. You have an Apple Watch template. You have Apple Vision Pro template.
Right.
And then you have all the templates for Android. It's going to turn into a nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a ton and ton of template files that you could theoretically start adding in. And so that's the reason why we decided to pre-optimize like the actual directory structure there,
Yeah.
is to like force people towards an organization.
I mean, that's also how Phoenix, the controllers now work more or less, right?
That's
Where you have with the
that's
page
exactly where we got
HTML.
it from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I like
So
that
that
actually. I always used to like, move all my templates into one subfolder, so to say. So I think that makes sense. Yeah. It was just
Yep.
interesting to me because when you generate the LiveView native, like native LiveView, whatever you call that, it generated like a folder with only one file in it. So what you said makes total sense, but only that appeared to me later that you do like the plus, iOS,
Yeah.
watchOS, whatever. So
So we have a blog post on that, and it's covered somewhat in the documentation. The like the naming convention around the format segment of the file names for the
mhm.
templates. We could go ahead and generate, like in the SwiftUI folder, a template for all those different device types.
Yeah, but you
But
won't need that maybe.
yeah, keep in mind that SwiftUI can kind of work in one of two ways.
Hmm.
Um, it has, and Jetpack kind of the same, which is Android's composable UI framework.
Hmm.
So um, SwiftUI, an application written in SwiftUI, can theoretically run on any uh, Apple device,
Hmm.
but there are going to be different ways that you want to style and represent information on the screen. But you could take like an application that you've built as is in for an iPhone and then go and run it on an Apple TV.
Hmm.
Like the views that some things just won't look right. A lot of things won't look right because it's a completely different form factor. But that's where we kind of were like erring on, is that like, look, we don't want to overwhelm you when you first install it with a ton of templates.
Hmm.
It's like, here's your single thing, and odds are you're probably going to be building for iPhone like
Yeah,
immediately.
yeah,
And so it's kind of like there was a decision there on which way do we go, and I'd like to err more on the side of simplicity than just saying, hey, you're new to this, let's overwhelm you with everything.
yeah. No, that makes sense to me, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest learning I took from the live stream is a little bit that although you write the code in, like a Neeks template, but which kind of looks like a Heeks template, and you
Mhm.
you reuse your live view and everything. So everything felt very much live view V. But then what I realized eventually is that actually you're writing a Swift UI app. So
Yes.
the code you're writing, the styles you're writing, nothing of that is in any way related to, the usual web development, like just HTML and Tailwind CSS.
Well, so you had that comment on Tailwind as well, and what the purpose of the style sheets that we have in there is, yes, to break apart, because in a SwiftUI view, typically, if you were to look at actual SwiftUI code,
Hmm.
you're going to find that every single view has these modifiers, which is SwiftUI's version of like CSS styling
Hmm.
or styling, and they end up being a lot. Like some views in a very complex or mature application can have like 30, 40 modifiers applied to it.
Hmm.
And um, breaking those out into individual classes that we can like dynamically call and actually do some sort of interpolation into is very powerful. But this actually sets up the framework for someone to go and create a Tailwind-like framework on top
Mm.
of it.
Right.
So we have an entire style sheet import system as well.
Hmm.
And the way that we modeled the retrieval of class names and style names out of templates is exactly what Tailwind does. So much so that I actually stole the Tailwind's regex
Hmm.
for actually parsing, and an earlier they have I mean, my regex foo is pretty weak at this point,
Yeah.
but they like the modern Tailwind library has a extremely complex regex system. And so I went back to one of the earlier ones where it's just like a concatenation of like 15 different regexes, and that works for us for now.
Right.
But similarly to Tailwind, you can't break up class names. Like you can't have dynamic class names defined in the template. They have to be whole strings.
Hmm.
And in our style sheet, that sheet sigil that you're writing into,
Yeah.
that's a macro that gets compiled down to an actual function.
Hmm.
And so what gets emitted is just a class function, and the arguments are a pattern match on how you defined the class name in the sheet itself. And so we rely upon Elixir's own pattern matching. We extract all the single, like um, the whole names of class names and modifier styles out of the templates. And then we just iterate through them and pass them into the class function, and whichever one matches gets dumped into our style sheet. And then we have a fallback at the end that just is an ignore.
Hmm.
And so this is a way that we can actually not just have a nice clean style sheet per format in our projects, but someone could go and write entire styling frameworks similar to Tailwind
Hmm.
and distribute that. And then you can just do an at import at the top. And we use we kind of bastardize the module attribute in
Mhm.
the @import function, but it's to kind of, again, lean into what's familiar. We don't want to go out and say, hey, you have to learn everything from top to bottom here. We know that most web developers in the Phoenix ecosystem are probably using Tailwind.
Mhm.
At the very least, it's fairly familiar to them. We know that most people at this point are fairly, they understand a lot of the ways that live views work. And so every time that we deviated like away from those in favor of what may be a little bit better in like certain cases,
Mhm.
it ended up biting us in the ass. And
Yeah.
so like I prototyped LiveView Native like early on back in 2021 or so, and then I handed it off to the team. I kind of managed the team from there,
Mhm.
but then it wasn't really going like kind of. I sometimes as a I have a hard time getting like my thoughts out sometimes and expressing them and saying, hey, this is like my vision for it. Or sometimes the individuals just aren't getting it. Either way, it just wasn't working. And so that's why part of the reason why it took so long to get it out,
Mhm.
because there were a lot of kind of feeling things out in particular directions, seeing what worked, but it just took time to kind of get the project realigned to where I felt like it was something that had value, that was easy to learn, but was really where I wanted the framework to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it feels. I mean, I also followed along the development, at least from what you shared at different conferences on Twitter and everything. So yeah, I also saw that you took a different um, like directions every now and then. You change direction, but I like from how it felt working with it. It felt like once you get behind it, that what you're actually building is a Swift UI app, and then you just kind of what do you call that, like hydrate the data in there, so
Yeah.
you have like a separate live view gen server running, and then that connects with your, so to say, Swift UI app, and the only thing that you do, that what you exchange, the messages you exchange between these two, is kind of just like updates to the data, and the same way that MorphDOM updates the HTML in your browser, the same way LiveView Native then updates your Swift UI app, right?
Yeah.
And that was an interesting understanding, because yeah, for me as a web developer, it always felt okay, like it kind of felt like magic, but whatever change I made, so the browser HTML always felt very much in sync with my live view, and for me
Mm.
it was never like, I never realized that actually these two things are two separate things. And
Yep.
if I change my HTML on the browser side, it might go out of sync with my live view state. Because
Mm.
I mean, why would I change my browser state, right? Or like the HTML. I would never change it manually. Like sometimes with JavaScript, but in general, I would not change it. But on Swift UI, that becomes much clearer, where we had that issue with the table view, the tab view, where like we build a tab view, and then in Swift UI, actually the tab changed. When we clicked on a second tab, it actually went to the tab, but that change was not sent back to our live view. So these two states
So
at that point, they deviated,
yeah,
and that was an
that's
issue.
why. So you were looking at one of the cookbook examples, and there was the PHX change event that's on the tab view.
Exactly.
So we had a conversation with Chris about that, and PHX change in Phoenix. We like what we didn't want to do was introduce a separate set of like bindings, like LVN dash whatever, because now you'd have a mix of PHX dash and LVN dash. So we wanted to lean into what Phoenix already offered.
Yeah.
But there are just things that you're going to be doing on native environments that those type of interactions don't exist
Hmm.
on web. And so PHX change is more or less kind of owned by the form bindings in LiveView on the web.
Yeah.
But in the case of the tab view, like you are changing a state there, like locally, and we wanted to be able to trigger that and like as an event server side. And so the PH Exchange event will trigger event server side, and then that can allow you to conditionally render into any of the actual tab view bodies.
Hmm.
But what you're trying to do is actually something that we're currently blocked on.
Okay.
You're trying to represent each of the tab view bodies as separate live views, like
Yes.
routing to them directly. So we Carson, who's the lead Swift UI dev, he and I just had a call with Chris on Wednesday about this. So what's currently, like LiveView can't support, like because the browser has one URL bar, like what you're treating it as is separately, like separate browser tabs,
Okay.
where there would be separate live views being instantiated, and you could technically do that. You could, like inside, you you could instantiate a separate live view, but that would then get a separate socket going, a separate WebSocket connection. You don't want that. That's not performant. Like that's how you can overwhelm the server if everyone has like 6, 7 WebSocket
Right.
connections going on. Everything should be over the same socket. And so LiveView does not support a method where you can manage multiple kind of navigated to states, rendering multiple live views. What you can do is you can call a live view from a live view, like a sub live view.
Yeah.
Or you could use a live component. We don't support either live components or sub live views just yet. And so I think that the way that we kind of ended the discussion was live components were the most likely best choice for rendering into those tab views, those bodies of those tab views individually. But we have some work to do on live components. Like I held back on live components for a couple. We support function components, but I held back on live components for a couple of reasons. The first of which was I didn't know what direction I wanted to go with it. So if I were to treat them similar to what we did with the live views, where the idea is that you're sharing event handling and state management for all connected clients, and there's significant like optimizations you get from that, right? Like if you already have a live view, a fairly mature live view web app built, I think you could probably see now like adding a native application to that and just leveraging all the existing state management and event handlers that are there means that you're going to be able to build a native app pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Provided that you know how to design for the target.
Yeah, and write Swift UI. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, so as an aside for a moment, that's something that we just can't get past in terms of like being able to make it simple. It has to be, I believe, this way. Like we could have just like punted to say, hey, we're just gonna do a web view or like cheat the way like Hotwire native did or PhoneGap, but they always feel kind of crappy. Like those type of solutions don't feel right. They don't feel like they were meant for that device. And so I knew I wanted to lean into for a couple of reasons. I wanted to lean into what the first class UI frameworks was providing, because DockYard is I mean, we're not a very big company. We try to take on big challenges, but we don't have like a ton of money to throw at these projects all the time. Whereas like something like React Native, that could be done because Meta has billions and billions of dollars that they can actually toss at these things, or they can reinvent the wheel, and then they own it, and then they own you, more or less.
True.
Like you are now in the metaverse for like your development experience, and you're towing the company line there. But for us, we need to actually try to be as, I'd say, cost efficient in this as possible. And that means that we don't have the ability or resources to go out and reinvent a UI framework from scratch. Apple's already done that. Google's already done that. Microsoft's already done that. And so if we can abstract those UI frameworks and represent them in a way that works for LiveView, that was going to be what works best for us.
Yeah.
And I think there's an argument there that is actually what works best in the end for the customers of your applications. As long as it feels native, it's going to have that same experience as you're expecting. Like when I'm on an Apple device, I have certain expectations as to what the experience feels like. If I'm on an Android device, same thing. And you're not going to catch me on a Windows device. Sorry.
Do they even exist?
Yeah, exactly. But it's just the way that it goes. Like there's a whole like design language that goes with these device families, operating systems, that make the average users kind of clue them into like, okay, I know how to do this because I've done this on another like natively built like Apple thing before. And you carry that over. But when it comes to these like build once, run anywhere frameworks, you lose that. It's always like a compromise on, hey, I'm gonna be more productive in how I like build this because I don't have to do it once, and then I can send it to any target. Well, the compromise there is that not only compromising our experience, but as I mentioned earlier, like how you design within that like device family, how you design for an iPhone is very different from how you're designing an Apple TV product.
Mm-hmm.
So how many React native like Apple TV apps are there? Like none. How many like Flutter like Vision Pro apps are there? There's
Yeah.
none. Because they're not even compiling for those platforms, because they'd have to go out and spend all this money to design a whole new UI framework around it to target those individual platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Like your reach on going with those build once run anywhere frameworks is actually significantly limited. They kind of paint you in a corner to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like why we decided to wrap these UI frameworks to begin with. But let me go back to the live component thing for a second, because I wanted to finish that thought.
Yeah.
So we could have treated live components just the way we do with the LiveView, in that the live components can manage state in advance. And if we wanted to share that amongst all of the particular formats that can render it, we could have done that, but we would have requested another upstream change in LiveView to do excuse me, render delegation. But Justin Tormey, who wrote the Lax application, he was one of our like really early adopters in this, and we worked with him to deliver a LiveView Native app for it. So this is the chat app. If you recall, the whole like LiveView ceiling talk, and Justin spent the weekends like, here's a chat app, it works.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, we'll do like, let's do LiveView Native for that. It was a good use case because it exposed a lot of like bugs that we had. Like there's only so much you can actually reasonably anticipate when something's cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to get it in front of people to actually realize, oh, that we got to change that, or that's something we didn't anticipate. And one of the things that we didn't anticipate at the time was that you're likely to have like device specific event handlers. Like there's just going to be reasons for that you may want to handle something differently on a native device, or you need to handle something differently on a native device than you would on the web. And so to get Lax done, we had a lot of kind of namespaced like SwiftUI dash event handlers in Lax. And I went through it later. I was like, you know, this feels like an anti-pattern to me. We shouldn't be having these format specific handlers. And that's where I started to think like maybe the live components is where we kind of deviate from the convention of the live view. So the live view permits you to handle and manage state and events, but then just delegates the rendering to a format specific render component, or in the case of HTML, you're rendering within the live view.
Okay.
But with a live component, what if, you know, those are just entirely just specific for that format? The same way that a function component would be specific for that format anyway. So there are still some things that we need to do within the clients in order to enable support for live component. But this is a much bigger project than just the live components, because what we found along the way is, you know, so LiveView was actually invented at DockYard when Chris was here, and I've seen it kind of from birth to where it is at this point. And despite that, there's still a lot about LiveView, and despite me like building LiveView Native, there's still about LiveView. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was in there. and so like there's moments where in Slack or Discord or on Twitter, someone will hit me up and say, hey, can it do this? Like, does it work with this PHX or attribute or whatever type of LiveView feature? I'm like, I had no idea that existed. And so it just, at some point it felt like whack-a-mole, where we were constantly kind of gathering requirements from the community and things that we were overlooking or didn't have insight to or just forgot about. And this felt like a bad way to develop. Like we were kind of like playing catch up on little like tic-tac things all over the place.
Yeah.
Let me just finish this one thought, because it's going to bring it to conclusion. There is I don't know if everyone follows the LiveView project on GitHub, but last February, I think it's Stefan, who joined the LiveView team, and he's primarily tasked with kind of taking all the JavaScript work off of Chris's shoulders. He built an end-to-end test suite for LiveView, which launches Playwright, and it will launch a bunch of headless browsers, and it'll actually like launch a Phoenix LiveView server in the test suite, and it'll run through and assert that all the behaviors for LiveView are correct through all these browsers. What we've done is we've taken that end-to-end test suite, and so in LiveView itself, we have two aspects of it. We have the client code that's written in the native language. So in the case of Swift UI, Swift,
Yeah.
for Jetpack, it's Kotlin. But everything that isn't directly related to that individual client, we've extracted out into a common library called LiveView Native Core.
Mm-hmm.
And LiveView Native Core handles the network layer. It handles like all the LiveView programming model stuff, the merging, the diff patching, like events flow through it. So basically, everything that is, if you want to go out and create a new client,
Mm-hmm.
you can leverage LiveView Native Core and get 80% of the work done for you automatically without having to just redo everything again.
Right. Okay.
And so what we've done is LiveView Native Core is written in Rust.
Mm-hmm.
We can compile this library down to WASM,
mm-hmm.
and we wrote a DOM implementation, and we swap out the JS files in the LiveView test suite, and we replace it with our WASM compiled file. And now we can actually run Phoenix LiveView's own end-to-end tests against our own core implementation. And it's giving us effectively just a task list of where we're incompatible
Mm-hmm.
or where we don't have something currently implemented. And so just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, Sebastian, who's doing that work, he got it up and running. Same thing with the unit tests for the LiveView JS file. And then we're going to do the same thing with the Phoenix channel unit tests in Phoenix itself. And now it's just a matter of him just going through and satisfying the tests,
Mm-hmm.
which at that point, we're going to be fairly compatible with the LiveView API. And then the last mile there is us taking those end-to-end tests and re-implementing them in the UI integration test suites for the clients themselves. So we actually run the individual Swift UI client, the Jetpack client, etc., through those test suites, so that when we're at that point, then we have a very high level of confidence that we're as compatible as LiveView is telling us we are. And if we find any places we're incompatible, it's because that test doesn't exist, and we just add it, and then we get better.
Okay, yeah, that's very, very interesting that you also managed to get these end-to-end tests running against your own core, basically against your own library, and it's written in Rust even.
Yeah.
So I mean, currently do you already support iOS and Android, or only iOS so far?
So the Jetpack client is, I'd say it could probably have been released by now, but we're kind of just trying to get it more finely tuned so it feels a little bit more complete the way the Swift UI client does.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Nelson, who's doing that work, he's writing all of our components right now.
Right.
And so all the views are covered, the event handling, all that stuff. And there's been a few, I'd say, brave people that have gone out and started to use it.
Yeah.
And we see it from time to time. I think that's great. It's, it's a double-edged sword because we haven't officially released it. And so I feel a little bit odd, or it feels like a mismanagement of time for us to support something that we've been clear that is not yet released.
Right.
Because time on that means time we're not spending on something else that is released.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the same time, it's also rewarding to see people using this. Nelson's been like great. He's been, I'd say, probably a little bit underutilized in the sense that we've held it back for so long because my focus has been on, well, in part because I have all Apple products, so it's easier for me to personally test it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, if I was Nelson, I probably would be not too happy because I've held back his side of the project for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been, just doing what we can do to get it done and get it ready. But it's been I'd say, I think he's been on the client work for over a year at this point, but Jetpack itself has been under development from 3 different engineers for over 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Now.
Okay.
And so, but there's trade-offs too. So LiveView Native was developed primarily with Swift UI as its use case.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we're expanding into Android, we find certain areas where some of our assumptions on LiveView Native are being challenged.
Mm-hmm. And
in part, that's because of just, can I swear on here? Do you care if I swear? I'll just say effing Google.
Yeah.
And like effing Google's like means of development where they're just like, whatever, ship it. And it's not like, it feels incomplete in certain places. So Jetpack Compose is a library UI framework that is in the name supposed to be composable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, because HTML is composable markup, Swift UI is a composable view tree. That is how like LiveView works in that we can represent it as a composable markup, and then we can do the diffing server side and recompose it
Right.
in the client.
Mm-hmm.
But in typical Google fashion, despite calling the framework compose, there's all these imperative things that happen all over the place.
Mm.
Where, for example, if you wanted to do string like decoration on a text element, so you wanted to make it look different, like it's not just like the rote text. It's like I want to give it a color.
Right.
You have to go down and start coding it. Like you can't just assign like particular style. It's called annotated text, and it's a class. It's not like a view struct in Jetpack.
Yeah.
And so we went over this over and over. Like Nelson had, because it's used all the time, Nelson had just kind of baked it into the like our representation of the framework and taken something that was a class and represented it as a view. And that works, but it breaks our kind of convention here. The line that I've held is that the client itself doesn't go, the API scope is only what is represented as a view in that framework.
Okay.
And so like in the Swift UI client, we don't have MapKit baked in. We don't even have camera access baked in because these are done in other libraries outside of Swift UI.
Okay.
Swift UI is only about like building UI layout and decoration.
Okay.
And so we have add-ons for those capabilities. But in Jetpack, it's a mess. It's like it's all over the place. In part, it does feel like it's still actively being developed, which it is. And so maybe those things come into views in the future. But we had to kind of I just held I put my foot down and said, look, we're only going to represent what can be represented as a view in this framework. I acknowledge that this functionality is necessary. And so we took that stuff and we broke them into add-ons as well. So like annotated text is an add-on, but it's an add-on that comes with the Jetpack client now. So from the user's perspective, it's like indifferent, but it's just kind of like this convention that I want us to hold the line on as hard as possible. It's going to make it easier for us long term.
So the line you're trying to hold is basically that you say, well, we have our LiveView Native Jetpack client, and that one is only gonna implement the, as you said, the views, so the UI views, basically the same as in Swift UI, where you only can create like components, so you can only create the UI with it, right? If you want to have a text, or if you want to have a table or a button, that you would do with Swift UI. But then,
so like annotated text is a way to do that, but it's not as a proper view. So when you were looking at the Swift UI stuff, like the text element for us was the text view in Swift UI. Like VStack is VStack. There is no annotated text view that exists in Jetpack. And so we would have to invent it, which means that in the future, if Google adds an annotated text representation in their view composition, then we have a deviant API, right? We've diverged there, where we're no longer able to rely upon the convention of saying, here is how it's represented for us. And then you can go easily mind map that and like find the original documentation for that view upstream in the UI framework, because it doesn't exist for that type of thing. But you still need to be able to do that in order to make your application look nice. So it's all these like really annoying things that exist in the Google world. And it's like, if anyone from Google's watching, like, what the hell? Like, I'm sorry, but like Google drives me crazy in this way that they'll have not just, I'm going on soapbox for a second. Not will they just kind of just do tire kicking on the community in this way. They'll ship incomplete products. They'll have multiple conflicting projects going on at the same time under the same roof. And then most of the time those all go away. I ironically, of all the three major kind of like device builders between Apple, like the Google Android landscape, and then Microsoft, Microsoft looks to be the easiest one for us to build for.
Interesting.
Because WinUI 3 has a template markup already called XAML, XAML. And to design and style Windows applications with the WinUI 3 in XAML is just elements and then attribute values. That's it. And so it's already built. Like it looks like it was designed to be wrapped by LiveView.
Like they thought about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's a little bit more than that, but like in the case of Swift UI, the modifiers, that ended up being a really difficult
Hmm.
place for us to get to eventually. I actually really like where we landed with it with the style sheets, but what it was originally was we were just going to do like element names and attribute values, and like, oh, we'll just add like a
Hmm.
a color background attribute value equals this, and then we'll collect them and then we'll apply them.
Yeah,
Well, as you saw yesterday, order matters, right? Order of the modifiers that get
exactly.
applied matter,
Yeah.
which is a bit strange coming from the web space, because in the web space you are changing the aspects of a single bounding box
Hmm.
on that element, whereas in I forget how you put it. You actually put it probably better than I'll articulate it right now. But in Swift UI, you're like putting layers
Yeah.
onto that existing thing, and
Yeah.
that layer can be like can change that aspect in color to anything it wants.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, which it's a different way to think about it. And I mean, not to say that's wrong, but it's coming from web. It's a bit of a learning curve.
Definitely, yeah, because
Um,
that surprised me as well. Because yeah, with HTML, like with CSS and HTML, you always design the whole thing, and it doesn't matter which way you design it, or
yeah,
like in which order. But then on Swift UI, it's always you add layers on top of layers on top of layers,
yeah.
style layers, so to say. I had a
So
question.
order does matter slightly with HTML in that you can override
Yeah,
previously
like the
declared CSS rules, but that's effectively it.
later rules they override earlier rules, but I mean
Yeah, yeah,
those will also be caught by your editor usually. And but in
yep,
Swift UI it's a built-in idea, you know, if you like, yeah, create a certain like a text of a certain width, and then you color it, and then you make it smaller, and then you color it again, then you have two different layers.
yep.
And yeah, I had a question because you mentioned that earlier, and that's something that I remember you saying, but I just realized it and it surprised me a little. So you said that you created all these elements for Swift UI that basically, like text, for example, a text component you called it, and that one is basically a Swift UI text component. And I just looked it up on the on LiveView Native Swift UI in the GitHub, and it's true. Like I just realized that you actually have your own, so to say, text component, and then if I
Mhm.
create that in my Neeks template, it just rendered, well, just in quotes, it renders a Swift UI text element actually.
Yeah, yep.
Why did you make that decision?
Instead of using the actual Swift UI one,
Yes, I don't know
uh,
yeah, what was the
we have to
motivation behind
wrap it
this?
in certain ways so that we can actually have the attributes being applied. Um, we can't. So a couple things. Number one, there is no reflection in Swift,
Mm-hmm.
so we can't. Um, we cannot do something where if we parse apart a document and we find an element name, we can't then dynamically say that is likely to be this view.
Okay,
So
right.
everything in Swift has to be declared.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that through a registry system where we have a dictionary, and dictionary is a Swift version of a map, key
Mm-hmm.
value store. And all of those, like every single tag name is the key, and then the actual value is the struct that we have. And so like text is probably the most simple example of a view that we're just wrapping.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing to understand in Swift UI is that it's not like a shell that the UI view tree ends up representing. Like what actually gets emitted out there is the result of that function, which is an actual Swift UI text
Right.
view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we needed a way on our own to control what's going into that so that we could have it play nicely with the way that we intend to be used. So like
Mm-hmm.
if we had just simply done like a rote copy of attribute values in, um, yeah, I think that would have been very limiting for us, and especially some of the more complex views that we're representing. Because then I don't like we can't reach into already defined code.
Mm-hmm.
So like we can't add to the existing Swift UI views in any way. So if we wanted to extend them to respond to event handlers like page click events,
Right.
that wouldn't have been possible.
Right.
So we need ways to represent that, but it's still a one-to-one parity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so a tab view in our LiveView Native implementation just is going to render a tab view in
Mm-hmm.
SwiftUI.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so and also the syntax that I use in my Neeks templates is different from what I see here in SwiftUI, like how you would actually write it. For example, the style attribute, as you said, in SwiftUI it's a style column, and then you write your styles, and in Neeks it is rather like a almost like an HTML attribute where you write style and then equal sign and something, right?
Yeah. So what we had early, about maybe 6 months ago, the style attribute didn't exist for us.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't have a tailwind framework yet, we found ourselves doing these kind of one-to-one class names,
Mm-hmm.
where like we would declare we want to put a modifier onto a view.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd have to go and write the class name for it. And then the class name would look just like the modifier, to the extent that Carson actually wrote a style sheet library. I think we called it utility styles at the time. And it was
Mm-hmm.
a pattern matching library that you could write any class names within the convention and actually have them dynamically compile down to SwiftUI modifiers.
Okay.
And I
And
was
sorry,
like, you know what?
with modifiers, you mean style modifiers, or what is a modifier in SwiftUI?
SwiftUI modifier does this is a bigger thing too, is that modifiers in SwiftUI can affect the look of something, but also the behavior.
Okay.
And modifiers in SwiftUI can render SwiftUI views as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the equivalent of a HTML, well, a web CSS like styling rule being able to render HTML from it.
Okay.
And so going way back to the beginning, this was like when we realized that our approach on modifiers was dead-ended in various attempts, because every single time we tried to fully represent what SwiftUI modifiers could do,
Mm-hmm.
we kept running into that issue of, and this modifier, which is used pretty frequently, now needs to render a SwiftUI view.
Mm-hmm.
And so now are we just having to write those, like that view markup within the modifier definition? And what, like, technically it could be infinitely recursive. Like you can have a view that's inside that modifier that has its own modifiers, and those modifiers could have views, and so on and so forth.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we had to find a way to do that and represent that properly. I don't know if I actually didn't watch the last 20 minutes of the video.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you ever got to it, but we have a whole kind of like sub-templating mechanism where we can pass in a template reference
Mm-hmm.
into a modifier. And then within your markup, if you use a template attribute equals and has the same reference name, when the view is being when SwiftUI is building out the view tree,
Mm-hmm.
it will parse the modifiers, and then it will look at its immediate children. And then if there is a matching if there's a matching element with that template reference, it will inject that as the modifier, like the view that gets dumped into the modifier.
Mm-hmm.
And then it will take it out of the view tree. If none of the modifiers have a matching template reference and there's elements, immediate children, that have template references,
Mm-hmm.
then we simply ignore them, so they don't get rendered.
Okay.
And this is flexible enough to allow us to do that infinitely recursive nature.
Okay.
But
yeah, I see some modifiers here. Yeah, I'm looking at the Scratchboard GitHub repo. I think.
no, I gotta delete that. Sorry, I thought Scratchboard is old. Don't
Okay.
look at Scratchboard. Yeah, you know what? I'll go do that right now.
Yeah, I just
I meant to do it last night.
But I just remember there was another example thing where we also looked at the tab view example, but I can't remember where it was now.
I'm going to change the visibility. But so we have a lot of kind of legacy stuff on in our org.
Mm-hmm.
And what is going on? Hold on. Because those legacy projects were representative of misdirection, or a dead end direction that the framework went into at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just haven't cleaned them up yet.
But didn't you have an example repo somewhere? I remember looking
There's a
at
cookbook
something.
one.
The cookbook, yeah, that's one. Okay.
The
That's,
cookbook is a better representation of where the framework's
yeah,
currently
this
at.
one.
And I'm convinced that where we're currently at is where we're going to be at forever now.
Okay.
Um, like the foundation is set, and our goal now is just to like increase scope,
Mm-hmm.
fix bugs, and then work on performance issues. And you saw some of the performance issues
Mm-hmm.
um the other day. Like that was a really strange one because as you noted, the data coming out of the server was in microseconds.
Yeah.
Um, the thing I'm convinced about, and we spoke about this briefly on Slack the other day. Um, we need to implement instrumentation into the render cycle of the Swift UI client so that we can start to identify and fix some of the performance
Mm-hmm.
rendering issues that we're running into. Um, but I'm also convinced that as much as the kind of common belief is that web is slow,
Mm-hmm.
I actually suspect that the web is faster than native when it comes to the way that this is working. Because on Swift UI, like it assumes that it's in a compiled state, that we are getting like a UI built and it pre-compiles it, and it's all this like declarative stuff that's happening at runtime to keep it fast
Mm-hmm.
and to keep the rendering fast. Whereas what we've been doing is we've been kind of treating the clients like browsers. We swap out HTML for Swift UI. We swap out CSS for like modifiers, and we
Mm-hmm.
swap out the runtime language of JavaScript for Swift. And we compose and build a view tree, and then we push that view tree into the Swift UI like runtime view tree, and it merges itself in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like the the two like the two projects that exist on this planet that probably have had the most money poured into it is DOM rendering and V8. And so
Mm-hmm.
like for performance, and so that's what we're kind of come up against at this point, is that once you get past like the idea that like JavaScript runtime, sure, it can be slow,
Mm-hmm.
but when it starts to work like with the browser API, that's technically browser native land at that point. And that's going to be as fine-tuned and as fast as Google, Apple, like all the browser vendors can possibly make it,
Mm-hmm.
because they've been dealing with hearing that the web is slow for 20 years now.
Right.
Whereas Swift UI for Apple's purposes is already very fast.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do is find where our performance overhead is. It may not even be in Swift UI. It could be in like LiveView Native Core,
Mm-hmm.
where the actual like parsing and building and merging of the markup is, and the building of the view tree is uh, going to
Yeah.
have some performance overhead possibly, and we end up building that data structure in Rust, and we send it over to the clients using Unify. And so that you don't have to reconstruct a view tree in the client itself.
What do you mean?
And
What's the difference there between the Rust backend, so to say, and the
so,
client you mentioned? Isn't it running
yeah,
all on iOS on the device?
no, like all the core functionality is running in Rust itself on device, but it's not in Swift code. Like
Okay.
it's running as a dependency
Mm-hmm.
of the project.
Okay.
And so Rust itself is going to be plenty fast. But what we don't know is if Unify, are you familiar with the Unify project?
No, no.
Okay, so Unify is written by Mozilla,
Uh-huh.
and it's an FFI implementation. And so it allows you to actually interact between languages over
Okay.
a bridge.
Right.
And so like rather than sending like a data structure that has to be reparsed
Mm-hmm.
in the target like language you're sending data into, you send it over the bridge, and when the target language receives it, it's already in the natively assumed like types.
Okay, so in this
So
situation, you would have a DOM representation in Rust, and like whenever a change comes in, you modify that representation, and then you
mm,
kind of convert that Rust representation using Unified to a Swift UI representation, and that actually updates the Swift UI front end, the client, so to say.
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
correct?
yes, more or less. But what I was getting to is that we don't know if maybe Unify is the overhead
Right.
that's happening
Okay.
there. Like,
But Yeah, it's
We need to
interesting. I
measure
mean,
it.
and you did you choose for Unify so that you could easily change like SwiftUI for Kotlin, for example?
Yeah, yeah. So we need it if we're going to be extracting all of this common functionality into a single library in
Mm-hmm.
Rust, because Rust is fairly portable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we could have gone with C, but either way, we would still need some way to get that out of Rust land into the target language
Mm-hmm.
itself. And Unify um, was it seemed like a very good option at the time, and it probably still is a very good option. It has major backing by Mozilla. It's being used in a lot of. I actually don't know the projects offhand that's being used in, but it's
Mm-hmm.
fairly well trusted at this point, even for being fairly new in the FFI space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we've never measured it. Like we've never actually determined if the um, if Unify is the overhead, or if
Right.
there's just overhead in how, like with Swift UI, it's a closed source project.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any insight into what's happening there. We can make assumptions based upon the behaviors we see. Like Swift, the language is open source, but Swift UI is closed source. And so we don't know what happens when we hand that off to Swift UI. Like
So,
we don't know where
yeah.
the optimizations could possibly be. Like we represent the view tree in a different way. Is that going to be more performant?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where we are. I've been trying to knock on the door of Apple devs for a while now. Like DockYard is an Apple vendor,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't just go and like start bothering people with an Apple with our stuff. And so I try to go through official channels.
Yeah.
And by design, Apple's kind of really shut down any ability for outside people to interact with the Swift UI team.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with SwiftUI, you mean the language is open source, so I can download it and I can write SwiftUI in my Xcode. But then what it actually does behind the scene when it compiles my code and everything and the APIs it offers me, like you don't have visibility into that. Is that what you mean with
Nope.
closed source?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
none.
And the whole like rendering engine that it uses, you also can't see that, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and that might be the issue here. Like it might be in Rust, it might be in Unify, or it might be in SwiftUI, and you just didn't know
We don't
where.
know until we measure it.
Right.
And so we're going to instrument different parts of the render cycle
Mm-hmm.
and see where like what's nice with LiveView on the web is that there's a I don't know if people I know most people probably know about enable debug on the live socket, but
Yeah.
there's also enable performance.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do enable performance on every single diff merge, it will show different parts of the render cycle
Mm-hmm.
and how much time it took.
Mm.
That's my goal, is that I want us to be able to achieve the exact same performance on the web, because right now, what you and I went through the other day after your video recording on Monday
Mm-hmm.
is I asked you to kind of like re-implement that counter on the web.
Yeah.
And on your phone, the web was more performant, like it felt faster.
Yeah.
And so that tells me it's not a network issue. That
Mm-hmm.
tells me that it's somewhere in the client rendering side. And that's fine with me, because network is out of our hands. Like if this was a network lag issue, we'd be screwed,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. And because it's somewhere in our code, we can fix it.
Interesting. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, also when we spoke about it, I also said like it's 0.3 for LiveView Native right now. So you got the basic
Yeah, but
the foundation down, but now the optimization starts, right?
this is just the way I am. Like I am maniacal about like details on
Mm.
these type of things. And
Yeah.
so that's why when I was going through your video, I was like, oh god damn it, I forgot that. I forgot that. Or like your point on the documentation where it kind of dead ends is
Mm-hmm.
true. The thing that so to explain that for a moment, where your confusion was you were going through the live view Heeks documentation, and it's just like, oh, there's no more paths forward. How do I build the application?
Yeah.
Because we put all that documentation in the Swift UI docs, because you're building a Swift UI application.
Right.
I wanted the live view native library itself to be agnostic as to the implementation of the client.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's guides and all this stuff. But what we should have at the very least in the live view native docs is, okay, now you've set it up. Which client are you using? Continue
Exactly.
here.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that
Yeah.
would probably
I mean,
satisfy the concern.
even just a link to LiveView LVN Go. Say, hey, you want to do Swift UI development? The easiest way is just download this app and point it at localhost 4000, and you're done. Or not localhost 4000 actually, like your local IP 4000,
Well,
Yeah.
it's always interesting watching other people use it because it all like as similar to our setups that we sometimes think that we are, there's always these differences.
Hmm.
So like you have two Wi-Fi networks in your house? What
I do.
was
Yeah.
going on there? Okay.
Well, I have my
And
office
then
one and I have my like living room, bedroom one.
and you've bridged the subnets there so that the different
Mhm.
subnets can ping each other?
They all go through one server. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So when we gave a workshop at ElixirConf,
Hmm.
and we were running into so many just setup issues. I knew this was gonna be a problem because conference like
Yeah.
Wi-Fi is a pain. But the first issue was that when you were like people had their we had just built Elixir and Go like
Hmm.
3 days before. And we were first gonna just have people running on their phone and then like as you did.
Yeah.
But the conference Wi-Fi for ElectraConf was putting devices on completely separate subnets. And
Mm.
so they actually couldn't talk to each other.
Interesting.
Some people were like, "Oh, let's do ngrok." I'm like, "That's a great idea," but I haven't used ngrok in a while.
Yeah.
And at some point over the past like 5-10 years, it's now a paid model. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not going to ask everyone to buy ngrok. That's
Yeah.
crap. Um, we had a Wi-Fi router, but here, like this is where it gets really annoying. Is that we set up the Wi-Fi router, we didn't plug internet into it because the conference venue wouldn't give us like an internet backbone to plug in.
Mm.
And there's this like weird thing in on Apple devices that they will report in being offline mode if they
Hmm.
don't detect outbound like outside global internet. And
Okay.
so in LiveView Native itself,
Hmm.
we have a state that it's basically just a state flag that when SwiftUI goes into offline mode, we render out a locally declared like offline view to say, oh, there's no connection at
Right.
the moment.
Okay.
And that's so that it doesn't crash, right?
Hmm.
And that's assuming that you don't have a connection. But in this particular case, everyone was working off of local network
Hmm.
and it should have been fine. And we couldn't get the damn application out of the state, even when so we kind of, I was just, I had it and I just like ripped open a wall and I pulled out a Cat5 cable and it plugged it into the router. And so we technically had internet at that point, but
Yeah.
that value got somehow cached in the application.
Oh.
And there was like this weird, it was like about 45 minutes of just chaos trying to get it going.
Internet. Yeah.
And but again, these are just like things that you run into that you don't anticipate
Yeah.
because we're building in a controlled fashion all along. And then it's like, oh damn, like that is different than what we
Yeah.
thought we were going
No,
to be doing.
I do know that. But I mean, also, to be fair, I mean, in my last video, I also said that I remember the time of LiveView version 3.0.3. Like, I
Yeah.
think I already worked with that back then, and it was very, very rough back then. So it already worked,
Yeah.
and I used it. But, like, I'm just saying, like, 0.3 for LiveView, like, what was it, like 5 years ago? I thought it was in a much more rough state, at least from from my memory,
Mm.
than LiveView Native is now in the 0.3 version. Like actually, like once you get over these more like skill issues really, because I didn't know how do I
Mm.
actually run this app on my phone, okay, and then I figured it out, and then we kind of got started pretty well. I mean, it's that's why like my experience with LiveView Native was pretty like positive once you got over that bump of okay, so this is not a website, so I can't just go to localhost 4000. So how
Yeah.
do I run this thing?
Oh yeah.
Um,
No, no. I definitely appreciate that. And I'm not trying to excuse anything away. I
mm,
actually like. What I was getting to is that I like when these things come up because I kind of look at it as free QA.
yeah,
It's like,
no,
okay, how much longer would we have gone like incubating this
yeah,
before we ran into that issue?
yeah, and
And
it is just like because you've been working on it for so long and you know exactly the flow to get to a certain
yeah,
point, and then somebody new comes in and ideally like they also tell you about it. Other people, they just like touch it and they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this thing, okay, I'm gonna move on. They don't actually give you feedback on it. So yeah, that's
yep.
why I try to do that. Interesting. But Brian, so I mean, you already touched a little bit on the next topics here, a little bit like the next steps for LiveView Native. I mean, you're still working on Jetpack for Kotlin, and now you're looking into like performance tweaks and debugging tools for SwiftUI. Like, are those the next steps for LiveView Native, or what are the big next topics that come up?
So I'd say that the big things for LiveView Native in terms of development are going into what we hope coming out of that end-to-end like testing capability, because
Mm-hmm.
this is going to start to like, despite the fact that we are actually emitting and building a native application, like it's
Mm-hmm.
not native light, it's not a web app that's doing a JS bridge. It's like this is actual native UI that's
Mm-hmm.
being built. Latency can kill that perception that it's native.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just flat out true. And any type of jank can kill that perception. And it's also fodder for, I mean, I'm like, I divorced myself almost entirely from the JavaScript ecosystem after like I stopped doing Ember.js,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm starting now to kind of like tap back into it because I'm curious to see like, okay, who's the competition? Like React Native is going to be our big competition here.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that world is just, I mean, despite all of the typical jokes about JavaScript, but I mean, they are very, very good about calling out like quality issues on
Okay.
libraries.
Okay.
And I think that that is a huge uh that's something that we typically have not been as good at speaking about or identifying what's going on with LiveView or like in Elixir in general to communicate to these other ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
So like the whole like Ryan Florence LiveView ceiling conversation debate, I'll call it debate,
Yeah.
uh, going on a few weeks ago. This can all be summed up to just a miscommunication as to like what the perception of what LiveView actually is.
Yeah.
Like from us within the Elixir ecosystem, we know that LiveView is, yes, it's server rendered, but it has this whole optimistic UI
Mm-hmm.
aspect to it that allows you that escape hatch to give you a as good or better performance in many cases than what a lot of like React or other like JS libraries do on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
And like our methods are more reliable in that sense. Nobody knows that. It's like so like they just dismiss LiveView and just say, oh, we know that server side rendering doesn't work for client side application framework. We've been down that road before. No need to revisit this topic. But
Right.
it's like, no. That's not what LiveView is. LiveView is a straddling of both of these worlds. It's more nuanced. You have to understand that.
Mm.
And that's also what LiveView native has to be. Like we are going to be subject to the network latency lag issues from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to get around that is through optimistic UI. And so like right away, even on the Lax application, we saw cases where if you're loading up a chat room, for example, that had like, you know, I don't know how many messages in it,
Yeah.
there was latency with loading that. But the perception of latency goes away as long as the user is immediately seeing UI render in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay showing skeleton UI. Like it's like, okay, yeah, there's messages here, they're coming in. But the Lax application, I think currently, like the mount function for the chat room will load in the messages from the database and then render them in the template.
Mm-hmm.
And what you really want to be using is like assign async or async assign. I always forget what order that goes in.
Assign
But
async. Yeah.
yeah, assign async. And so you render out the Chrome of the chat room immediately, and
Mm-hmm.
you get that as fast as possible over the network. And then you just show skeleton UI, like a loading indicator that these messages are coming in. That's what users want. That gives them the perception of speed.
Mm-hmm.
We discovered an issue yesterday actually with navigation stack. So in SwiftUI, navigation stack is how you navigate between different views.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a modifier called navigation title. And navigation title, you can apply it to any view
Mm-hmm.
that is within a navigation stack, and it will put a title at the top. And like when you navigate from one pane to another, it will take the previous navigation title and shrink it down and move it to the upper left, and this will become the back button.
Right.
It's a common pattern that you've seen.
Yeah.
And then
It's
yeah, as the next page is animating in, that navigation title will be available and go into the like place that the previous navigation title was.
right. Mm-hmm.
So what we found was that with LiveView Native, actually we saw this before, but we figured out what the problem was. We unfortunately haven't figured out the solution.
Yeah.
Is that because we have a when you kick off a navigation event,
Mm-hmm.
navigation link, we immediately render out a connecting view. And it's up
Mm-hmm.
to you to define what that connecting view is. That connecting view, I think by default shows a progress view, which is like a little like spinner.
Okay.
And that's actually not great. Like we're gonna have to refactor that because it feels too web-like
Mm.
when it shows that spinner.
Yeah.
Um, and then when the next view gets built in LiveView Native and then injected into the view tree, it replaces that connecting view immediately. And usually this is fast enough that during the transition of the animation for navigation, that view body is swapped out fairly fast.
Mm-hmm.
But if that view body includes a navigation title modifier, what you'll see is that the prior navigation title gets pushed up. There'll be no navigation title coming across during the animation, but you'll see the new body immediately in the navigation. And then once the navigation animation is complete,
Mm-hmm.
the navigation title will pop in and then push the content down. And so it's this janky
Right.
feel.
Yeah.
And what we found yesterday was that that SwiftUI, when it kicks off the navigation event, it immediately looks at the view that's being injected in for the next page.
Mm-hmm.
And if that view has a navigation title, that will be injected in as navigation title that comes across that like is taking up that space.
Mm.
But because our connecting view doesn't have one, it ends up being a nil.
Okay. So you need
like
to add that
nil space.
title and then it
Well, you
might.
could, but you don't know
Yeah.
how to do that because that's in the client. It's not being served up from the server in any way
Mm-hmm.
because you still need the network to go out and get it.
Right.
And but this is like a feature of SwiftUI or a feature of bug, however you want to call it, where it will cache that value in the navigation title,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't allow replacement of the navigation title value until
Oh.
the animation's complete.
So you can't just put
And
loading and then once the view is loaded, you can't replace it with the actual title.
yeah, so I submitted a bug. I submitted a bug to Apple. I don't
Well.
expect to hear back on it, but it's one of those things that we don't have a good solution for it at the moment.
Yeah.
What we could do is we could delay navigation until we get the view tree from the client,
Mm-hmm.
but this is going to make navigation feel slow.
True.
We
Yeah.
could put
Bern,
in a
I
free
think
value.
I believe you. Like I'm looking forward to your solution on that. I just, if you don't mind, I have a question from Zach that I would like to ask you.
Go ahead.
So he asked, Zach Daniel asked, is it possible to have some amount of UI like your shell/layout shipped with the native app? I've been wondering the
Yes.
same thing for LiveView. Is it as if we can have a classic CDN delivered static page as the entry point? Is that possible?
Yeah. So yes. So we just like with LiveView itself, LiveView Native can be done in a hybrid fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have a pre-existing SwiftUI app, and then just like the LiveView Native view is just a SwiftUI view, and you can drop it into any point. Like if you were to bring up the Xcode project
Mm-hmm.
that you had yesterday, you could look at the content view and you can put anything in there that you want and just put live view wherever in that, like somewhere as a child in the view tree.
Mm-hmm.
And wherever that live view is, that then is where LiveView Native kicks in.
Okay.
So you could wrap it any way that you want. You could, if you have a 5-year-old SwiftUI application that's been built up over time and you're sick of only one aspect of it is making API calls for remote data,
Mm-hmm.
you could replace that one view with LiveView Native and then keep the rest of it on device natively.
Okay.
That all works.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, in the content view, you just wrap the live view, and that way you could add some static content while the live view is loading, for example.
Yeah. So sounds like you're trying it out right now, but I
have it in front of me.
Okay. Are you streaming your screen? Because I actually don't see it on the Meet.
It's not on Meet. No, it's on the stream.
Okay.
Yeah, I can send you a link to the stream. Then you can just see.
Well, you can share your screen here too, right?
I think I can. Yeah, true. Wait, this one. Yeah.
So I can't see anyone that may be asking questions. Hi, Zach.
I have to. Firefox is asking me for some permissions.
All right, never mind. Hold on. I'll just open up your stream. That's gonna be too much of a pain. Let me see here real quick.
Z.
Is it on the same YouTube channel?
Yeah, Peter and Code.
Okay.
But it's a little bit delayed. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, I know.
I guess I just have to restart my Firefox and then it should work. But hang on. It's always that thing.
I'm hearing myself from like 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, yeah. So if like right above that, so that little hashtag at the beginning denotes a macro in SwiftUI, which is why you had to do those whole like trust and enable,
Right.
which is really annoying. And the trust and enable is there because there is no trusted source of dependencies in Swift at the moment. There's no like hex equivalent, right? And so anyone can deploy an application, and if it's a macro that's doing some type of code gen at compilation time, Apple wants you to say, okay, yeah, I'm fine with that. And that's really what the macro system does. But if you were to put like a text element just above it, just like write text and then put whatever, and then you could wrap it in a VStack, that will all work. It'll look I mean, at that point it doesn't own the entire screen, but it works just fine. Okay. This actually brings me to a question you had yesterday regarding the LVN Go app and some of your struggles with getting disconnected. So you had suggested that we could put like a back button up top. If we do that, that actually pushes down the UI of the application you're building. Right. And so it'd be like, so I think Constantine's the one that mentioned it, but like we just have like a shaking interaction at the moment.
Yeah.
On different platforms, like on desktop, it will keep the connecting like screen as a separate window open, and then it'll open up a new window for the native application. So you can always have separate windows managing it. But we're going to be shipping LVN Go. We have it for iPad, iPhone, and Mac OS at the moment, but we're going to be shipping in Apple Watch, Apple TV, and Apple Vision Pro versions of it. And then probably sometime before the end of the year, we're going to start working on the Jetpack version of LVN Go as well. That one's going to be interesting because, I mean, how many Android devices are there out there? Yeah. Like an infinite number. So I'll have to make some decisions on what we build for that.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure about if you build it in, what is it, the one studio thing, Android Studio, where you build that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not sure whether how many platforms you can target at the same time. Yeah.
Well, it's turning into like we've run into interesting problems between the two different worlds between Jetpack and SwiftUI, because for Xcode, the project that we built, and when it generates a project, we rely upon this library called Xcode Gen that will actually like build your Xcode project for you. But then there's these weird issues that occur where, so what we generate is called a multi-platform target. And so you can build for any of Apple's devices, and that you'll see two projects in your Xcode project, one for Apple Watch and then one for everything else. Because Apple Watch, because of legacy needs, like older Apple Watches required a companion application, so they have to have you like have two side by side. But then randomly, I don't know why, sometimes people will report that when they open up their generated Xcode project, it will default to Apple Watch. Okay. And we don't have any control over this. Like there's no flag that we can say, here's your target, like here's your default target that should be opened up. To the point where I'm considering removing Apple Watch from the like generated project, just because no one wants to build an Apple Watch like when they're trying out Xcode LiveView Native for the first time.
Probably not, no. But I mean, make it easy to enable it eventually. That would be good. But don't have it enabled right away. Yeah. True. Interesting. I also have another question. Like, I mean, since DockYard is developing this technology, have you also used it in client projects already in production?
We don't have any clients with it at the moment. No. I mean, this is a bigger problem that exists outside of DockYard, but consulting's been really tough over the past few years. It's been like DockYard has unfortunately had to do layoffs, and it's been a shitty few years. Like there's no two ways around it. That's about as you know upfront as I can be. We're downstream of a lot of stuff. Like, I mean, first of all, majority of DockYard's clients historically have always been organizations that are taking out loans to do projects or are being funded.
Mm-hmm.
And with inflation being what it has been over the past few years, that's been kind of a non-factor.
Mm.
So that all to say that I think that my goal is to at least land one LiveView Native client sometime over the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But ironically, I think that there are actually 2 consultancies I know of that are doing LiveView Native projects for their clients. I don't want to mention who they are, not to have competition. I just don't want to. They asked me in confidence, about certain things, so I didn't want to say anything. But I think too that these are like kind of individual consultants, and in those type of arrangements, you typically have more control over the technology stack, whereas a typical DockYard client is usually a well-funded startup, coming in with some like technology already, an opinion on it. So there's like a big part of what I've been telling the team all along is like building it and getting to this point is probably like 25% of the work. It's like education, building trust, marketing, etc. That's like the real work on adoption when it comes to anything. But for this project, because we're not just introducing something new, we're also a fairly small company, and so we're saying, hey, like, trust us with your application stack.
Yeah, kind of. And also,
I think that we actually,
I think
we have something that can be trusted.
Yeah, and you need to be able to maintain it. I mean, it's not, if it was React Native, they could also find a different contractor eventually. But with LiveView Native, there aren't that many out there, I guess. But
that takes time.
Yeah,
but you're now a LiveView Native developer.
Yeah, basically, I can put it on my CV. Yeah. I mean, that also brings up a bigger question. I mean, you as somebody who has been working in the Elixir space, especially as a consultant for quite some time already, and you said that the market isn't that great. How do you look at the Elixir system, the ecosystem right now, like in terms of
underperforming?
We're underperforming. Like, is it easy to sell Elixir? Is it hard to sell Elixir? Should we do things differently? What's your take on that?
That's like a 2-hour discussion. But I mean, so this to say, I mean, I don't mind pissing people off when it comes to these type of things, because DockYard and me personally, I mean, I've put in a lot of my own money, my own time into helping build, and as have other people. But I feel like I have a stake in the game at this point, and I feel like I actually have the right to speak about areas in which we're underperforming, and adoption is certainly one. And it's not because of the technical expertise. There are multiple reasons for underperformance. I'd say if there was like one specific thing that we can be doing better, it's stop going to Elixir conferences and go to other conferences and talk about Elixir, period. Right. And so Zach, I assume it's Zach Daniels that you're referring to.
Exactly.
Zach's been probably one of the best people about doing this as of recently. He and I have had conversations about this. I've been pushing people to do that. I'm going to start doing it. Like, the only outcome we get from going to Elixir conferences and talking to other Elixir people is that at the end of the conference, there's less Elixir people, because the only outcome is attrition. Like, there's no higher level of we don't like have an Elixir conference with all Elixir people and then end up with more Elixir people at the end of the conference. Like, the only possible outcome is attrition. Where someone's like, oh, I got to go get a different job now.
I mean, it depends, right? Because some people might be interested in Elixir and then they come, to check it out. But I mean, they might not pay $800.
If that's the case, it's not working, right? Yeah. And so the like, what we should be doing is going into the Lion's Den. We should be going into, like, I would love to get LiveView presentations into ReactConf. Because that's a hostile audience, but there's fairly smart people. Where I think now, especially, like, what we're starting to see happen in the React space and just the general like client-side application space is buyer's remorse. Like, more and more, I'm seeing this happen where there are people actually saying, you know what, like, maybe the complexity of building out these applications at this point is just too high. That you see. This has been, if I had like one like real stone to throw at the JavaScript ecosystem, and this is a fact, is that there are too many of these people that go into an organization, they evangelize, like, we got to move over to this new thing, and then they bounce out within 6 months before the job becomes crap.
Right.
where it becomes like a complete nightmare to maintain. And then they say, good luck, everyone. I'm going to go over to someplace else and do a new greenfield project. And they're just leaving this wake of destruction behind them. And that's absolutely true. And when I say destruction, I mean in terms of cost, overhead, bloat. So I had this like kind of adoption is like a really, I mean, for many reasons, it's really important to me because I want Elixir to succeed because I love writing in Elixir, but I'm also financially like tied to the language, like significantly. I've put all the eggs in the Elixir basket, so to speak. And so I've been speaking with like a lot of people over the past few months on the topic of adoption within different market segments, within different like industry levels of companies. And I've run into all these really weird stories that I would otherwise dismiss, but I heard them multiple times from multiple people. And so, for example, like one of the big selling points of Elixir that we've been pushing in the community for a while now is that it's faster. It requires less people to build and maintain projects. Like building with Elixir is cheaper, less expensive. I'm like, okay, is that true? And like, I feel it's true, but in many ways, I feel it's really more accurately defined, like applicable to the last 20% of a project right now.
What do you
Like
mean
doing
with
the hard parts of it.
Yeah, what are the last 20%? What do you mean with that?
Just not in terms of time, just in terms of complexity. Like so like Phoenix Presence, for example, this is like a technology that doesn't exist in other ecosystems that would cost like millions of dollars to re-implement. Like if like it's necessary and it closes that like 1% gap for certain companies, but it's a very expensive technology to reproduce. And we can just drop it in. Distribution, managing distribution, like all these performance things at scale. Are these really important problems for people that are starting out in Elixir? Probably not. The most important problem for someone starting out Elixir is how do I build my MVP as soon as possible? And we're actually pretty bad at that, I think. Like we don't have enough tooling or enough kind of like pre-baked things to actually move people along at the start of projects. And we're starting to do it. Like the rise of the UI component frameworks like Bloom and some of the other ones that are coming along, I think is excellent because this accelerates that process quite a bit. Zach's project Igniter, I think can be a key part of that because, you know, I've spoken about it, where the idea of being able to just like build out a SaaS application in 5 minutes, like that should be possible in Elixir without any issue, but we don't have it. And the reason for it is almost because Elixir is so easy. Like how often have you seen someone come into a chat room and say like, how do I do this? Or is there a library for this? And then someone replies, oh, you don't need a library. You can write it real easily yourself. That's technically true, but it's a stupid thing to say. Stop saying it, people. Like stop telling people that. And if someone's asking for the library, go ahead and build it. Like like we need these things because Elixir has attracted a certain level of engineer over like its lifetime. It's primarily like senior level people that are transitioning over from other technologies. And so, you know, people at that level have seen it all. They know like where the bodies are buried on certain projects. And yeah, I think that they kind of understand that bringing in too many dependencies can be a problem. But if I'm a junior engineer and I'm exploring a language, or I'm a mid-level engineer and I'm starting to just like kick the tires on Elixir, then I don't want to start from zero. Like get me like the 15-minute blog thing, like get me up and going as soon as possible. This is one of the bigger issues I think that exists for us. And it's something that I've recently identified that DockYard wants to start like really helping on as well. So we actually have a little bit of a solution for this in-house that we haven't released yet. There's 2 projects, one of which is a UI framework that's a very different UI framework than what other people have built. Like the UI frameworks that are currently out there, the UI like function component frameworks, they kind of, I think that they're great if you want to go with like a pre-baked like styling solution. What we've done is that we built like the functional side of it and have like almost a like bland styling, because they're saying like, you know, your styling is your decision. You're going to build on top of this, but here's something that works, that looks okay, but functionally it provides all this functionality that you're going to otherwise have to be writing from scratch every single time.
Okay.
And there is a small project to like get other projects up and running really fast. But we had written it before Igniter came out, and I think we may want to rewrite it in Igniter or let Zach do his version of it and just end up using that.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
that's where these type of optimizations at the upfront side of building an application or building a project or a product is a huge like market gap for Elixir at the moment that absolutely needs to be addressed. So like we need, and also like some of the progress that's occurred recently is really great, but our lack of like a unified language server is a huge problem for us.
Right.
Just like the issues that have existed amongst the language server projects. Like, so when you have someone trying out Elixir or any technology, they're bringing in their predefined institutionalized knowledge, right? And so if they're coming from a TypeScript or JavaScript background or Rust background or wherever, like I'm gonna try to Elixir, like where's the language server? And they start to install it and it just breaks. They're like, what the hell? Like this is like that for them ends up being the point in which they jump out. They don't even really get to like some of the real value propositions of the language. So I'm really glad to see that effort taking off.
I agree
but
with that.
There are, but there's like, so for example, going back to the point around the like the cost or the number of people that we require to build an equivalent application with, I heard from 3 separate startups, and this is going to sound like complete BS, but because I heard it from 3 people, I'm led to believe that there's something there. But like companies going through startup funding rounds, they have requirements that they have to meet.
Okay.
And just because they get promised a certain like windfall of money in a round, they don't have access to all that money right away. There's like certain KPIs, key performance indicators, they have to actually achieve over time to unlock different parts of that funding round. VCs, private equity, etc., they have their idea on how to actually get ROI. And part of that is we need to scale this. We need to get it up. And then in their heads, because of their experience, they have an idea on how much scale and where that scale should apply within the organization that they're funding to achieve that. In their minds, they're divorced from the technology. They just know we need a team this size to achieve this.
Right. Okay.
And so I heard this story where they started out with Elixir, they started out with Phoenix, and during funding, they had to change their technology stack because they didn't need as many people as they were told they had to hire in order to unlock another funding round, which is insane.
Yeah,
is backwards.
Also, they couldn't have found that many Elixir developers, maybe, that are available.
That wasn't the issue. They only needed like 3 or 4 devs, and they had that team in place.
Right. Yeah. But
no,
you need
to. Management was convinced that they needed a team of 20 engineers in order to achieve the scale. Like, no, we don't. And then we're moving the tech stack.
Just so that we can hire 20 people instead of 3. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the way it was communicated to me, at least.
Yeah.
But I think that is a solvable problem in that there is that tells me that there's a knowledge gap for those that are like kind of giving those terms in what is actually necessary. And what is currently a weakness, we can flip into a strength. Because if we can actually prove and show that Elixir requires less people, less cost to build out these applications, these are people that are primarily motivated by finance. They're primarily motivated by burn rate.
Right.
And this is where Elixir can shine. But we don't have anything at the moment. We don't have any way to interface with these people.
Yeah, true. Actually,
we don't have anyone to actually go out and actually like sell that aspect on our behalf.
You know, Jacob Lutzov, the Elixir mentor, he says also he had a buddy, and this happened to his team with a VC as well, what you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so validation right there. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane that that's the case.
Oh my. Okay, just, I don't know, hire some React developers and make it a back-end front-end divide maybe.
Well, so I think that, especially coming out of the past few years, that VCs should be especially more concerned about the burn rate. Like even going back in my own history, like I've been programming since I was 14, and like I saw like the rise of the web in the early 2000s, the tech crash, and then when Rails came about, you had this whole kind of like new culture of startups that came about from it, because Rails was going out there and competing with PHP, it was competing with Java, and it was saying we can build the same applications in half the time and half the cost.
Yeah.
And this is like people with money are like, yes, we can like build something with less money. We need to actually get back to that point now Whereas the whole kind of culture of the past 20 years has been about spend, spend, spend.
Mm-hmm.
If we can actually convince these people that they don't need to spend as much and actually come out with a better product at the end,
Mm-hmm.
that positions Elixir into a world of its own that no one else can really touch. That's a difficult thing, but I think the only way to do it is we have to find a venture capitalist or someone in that space that's like a thought leader that actually has influence there, that is already talking about the need to bring down costs to build startups.
True. I mean,
if we can find that person, that would be the right person to talk to and start to educate them. But we also need to prove it, right? So we need these upfront optimizations on application building too.
True. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's interesting now that we don't have a zero interest rate anymore. Like these kind of things might also become more important again. Also, something else that Bruce Tate said, which I agreed with a lot. So he said that Elixir, it can't avoid company killers. That's what he calls them. Like sometimes you have a problem that it becomes so big that your company just dies because of it, because the technology doesn't support a certain use case. You scale to a certain size, and out of a sudden your, whatever Node.js backend can't scale with the number of users you have, and your company actually dies because of that. I thought that
happens, but for those companies, like that happens much further along in their like maturation process, where they've already they're so deep on their tech choice at that point. Asking them to change is really tricky. Because and that's like another issue that exists in the moment with LiveView, that if you want to sell someone on like Next.js versus another like JavaScript framework, the sell of that is a little bit easier. Not like, let's move the aspect of like the individuals on your team already. Like if you have JS developers, it may be easier, but you're not asking someone to swap out your entire tech stack.
No.
If you want someone that doesn't use Elixir at the moment to use LiveView, it's an all or nothing decision. And that can be a bit of a tough sell.
Interesting. So maybe
the value propositions that we're currently talking about, we need to be moving over towards order of magnitude value propositions as opposed to like road bump value propositions.
Right. Okay. So just, to reiterate, like you said, okay, we should be getting better at getting started quickly with applications in Phoenix. So like a UI framework, for example, the dev experience must also be better with a better LSP. But then, sorry, you also mentioned something that we need to focus on certain kinds of companies that might benefit from Elixir. Which ones were those again?
No, it was more that there are different reasons why Elixir has been difficult to adopt based upon the company type. And so I've spoken about like startups right now. On the enterprise level, on the complete opposite side of that spectrum, there are other issues. So for example, like nobody at the moment is selling enterprise support for Elixir.
Right.
Nobody. And this, like when an enterprise company is adopting a technology, their list of requirements can be pretty deep, but they're also kind of like just like there's a lot of them, but they can be just like basic stuff, like checkbox type stuff. So for example, an IT department typically in an enterprise company is the one who has say over whether or not technology gets adopted, or whether it could be used internally. Like it will do a risk assessment, and part of their risk assessment is, does the language have long-term support? Technically Elixir does, because it's stable since 1.0 and it'll be stable indefinitely. But because none of the versions have that LTS sticker on it, that's what like an IT person that's not familiar with Elixir, they don't want to get into the nuance of it. They're just like, you know what, it doesn't have LTS, okay, moving on to the next thing. There is no like first-class support for Oracle or Microsoft SQL databases.
Right.
And I've spoken to Jose about this, and we come to he has a different opinion on it. Like there is an Oracle database driver, but it's not first class. And there's like, so these are like the things that give enterprise cause for concern, because they don't understand that in Elixir, the issues that you have in other languages are not the same, that it doesn't require like a team of 20 to maintain a database driver. It can require a single person just to do like the Ecto version of it.
Right.
But they don't get into the nuance of that. They're looking for like they have a mental model on what they know they can reject, and Elixir seems to not be answering these questions properly for that level in many different ways. The hiring question, I think, is just kind of there for everybody in terms of, chicken or egg. Who's gonna, are you gonna go out and learn Elixir before there's a job available, or are you gonna get a job and learn Elixir? We tried to solve that to a degree with DockYard Academy. I think our timing was not great because like we hired Brooklyn, and then like 2 months later, like everything went to shit.
Yeah.
and so and so like our whole vision there was that we wanted to create more junior developers and get them into the market and start doing job placements with them, that we would, and also for DockYard's sake, like we make, like, our margins are really, really difficult at the moment because salaries have been going up. Companies are just fighting back on rates. And so we're getting squeezed out. And so we need higher margin employees to actually continue to survive and continue to invest in ways like this, like between LiveView Native, all the support that we gave for years for Phoenix development, for LiveView itself, Beacon, and some of our other projects. Like, I don't want to, pat myself on the shoulders too much, but I do feel like if it wasn't for DockYard's investments, the Elixir ecosystem would look very different than it is today.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you're known for more than one or two very interesting projects for sure. Interesting. I mean, what do you think about like Elixir going into the width of different technologies now? Like we go into NERS, we go into AI. We already have Phoenix, so that's web development. What do you think about that? Like, is that a good adoption thing, or should we maybe just go all in on web development, for example?
No. So I think that Elixir's reputation in the larger world is a perception that it is a web language. And that was good early on. I think that it's limiting now. And part of LiveView Native is actually to try to expand upon that perception of it. Like, not to say, hey, you can only build web apps with Elixir. And I've heard this from many people that I've spoken to outside of Elixir, like about Elixir, like, oh yeah, it's like Ruby, like, no, it's like, it's way more than Ruby. And so like projects like Nerves, I think are amazing. I've done some Nerves work. I'm actually, so Halloween's coming up and I don't have a lot of time to continue to do it. What am I looking at? Oh, there's your Nerves device. Cool.
I'm also playing around with it. That's the Raspberry Pi Zero with a with a P hat for quick, and that's just a temperature sensor, like a CO2 sensor there. Yeah, but I'm just playing around with that currently as well.
Yep. So in the United States, we have this place called the Home Depot. I don't know if you've heard of the Home Depot before.
Yeah, I do know about it.
And so every, like, usually late August, the Home Depot just gets like, they have an entire Halloween display set up. And they have these like really kind of, they sell them kind of expensive now because they're so popular, but these animatronics. And like it'll dance around and it'll sing. And so I bought a few years ago, and I hacked them with an Arduino 2 years ago. But this year I have this project I've been trying to get back to. I bought a bunch of Raspberry Pi Zeros, and I want to actually there's a central control unit on the animatronics that, and then just like sends power to the servos on like the arms and tells it when to move. I want to like unclip the wires going to the servos, clip them into the Raspberry Pi board, and then be able to actually control the servos individually, and then have the individuals dance as I declare. And so I want to have a whole army of dancing animatronics built with Nerves. And like, it's actually not a complex thing to do with Nerves because you can just like turn on, the switch or not. But I just haven't been able to get back to it. I have one of them, and it's like a weekend, right? So weekend worth of work, and I have all the hardware here. I need to get to it.
Yeah, I have the same issue. I just keep buying stuff for Raspberry Pis.
Your place looks clean compared to mine. Like my office, my wife hates it.
Yeah,
it is a nightmare of like half-baked ideas. Like, I'm gonna build this.
I only keep this space clean. Everything around it is just chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
So just for the camera.
That's why I keep telling my wife, I'm not the only one. Other developers are the same way. Like,
we are the same.
We don't have enough space in our heads to keep all the clutter, so it just gets like into the world.
Exactly.
Starts driving people crazy. But my development environment is nice and clean.
Yeah.
Well, but I do think that those type of projects help build the utility of Elixir, but they need, like, there's certain things that they need to kind of bridge the gap. And when it comes to Nerves, The world of like embedded, this is why we had the Lumen project a few years ago. We were trying to compile Erlang and Elixir down to WebAssembly, because the real goal of that was to get to WASI compilation. WASI compilation is the specification to run like pre-built binaries on command line, like as part of like a, it's portable as a binary.
Okay.
That can run on any system. And we actually got to the point where we can compile we could like read an Elixir project and compile it down, and it was less than 5 megabytes. And so compared to nerves, that's like roughly 20 megabytes. Those type of footprints do matter in the embedded space. And the smaller and smaller and smaller you can make your embedded applications, the more places it could potentially be used. So some of the utility of nerves is somewhat limited just by how fat like Erlang is, like how much gets baked into there.
I actually bought a Raspberry Pi Pico 2. I'm sorry, it's the other way around, this way. And that one is a microcontroller, and you can't run nerves on it because it has only, I don't know, like 100 kilobytes or maybe 1 megabyte of RAM or 2 megabytes. But there is another project which is called Atom VM. And they support the Pico. So I'm quite interested in playing around with that stuff, because
I didn't mean to check them out.
Yeah, Atom VM. And so the thing is, you have your animatrons that you want to program. I have my own project, which is a little boat that I want to build with Elixir.
I heard about that. That interests me quite a bit.
Yeah, well,
As
I just have yeah, exactly, and I just have all the stuff here. I have like little rotary engines, so I can move like a propeller or something. And my idea is, because I'm also a sailor. I used to be, with my parents at least, until I moved out. And I want to build like a little RV, another RV, RC, I think you call them, boat, maybe with a 3D printer, add like, the motors, for the propeller and for the rudder. And then maybe, I don't know, connect it to some like controller and send it over the canal sea. That's my idea.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, when we start, it's always interesting when we take our digital kind of experiences and try to bring them into the analog world.
Yeah.
And things don't work quite the same sometimes. Like, so we built these projects with nerves. I have this, like, in DockYard's R&D department, which I run, we have LiveView Native, we have Beacon, and then I have my passion project, which is I bought the domain name racing.org a few years ago, and we're building out a computational fluid dynamics simulator, which is a way to actually simulate the flow of fluid over a body.
Oh, cool.
And the reason I'm doing this is because I race sailboats, and I have what's called a sport boat. Sport boats are different than what are called heavier displacement sailboats. And the rating system that's typically used for a handicap is antiquated, and there's no like real incentive to update it. So we get handicapped in a way that is unfair. Like, we can beat everyone else in the race by like 5 minutes, but they get time corrected to being like third or fourth, and that's kind of a kick in the butt.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And it's mostly because they're using these older algorithms to determine the boat's performance. But all those algorithms were written for boats before this style of boat was even invented, right? And so like the physical aspects are not being properly taken into account. A CFD is the way to do it, but CFDs are very, very expensive to run in terms of time and money. Like, doing a single frame for a fairly complex CFD sim can sometimes take weeks to months to actually render out.
Jesus.
But there have been a lot of improvements to some of the methods. And so, not to go too deep into it, but one of the major improvements is moving over to another method calculation called Lattice-Boltzmann that can leverage floating point calculations. And so we can use GPUs to accelerate it further.
Okay.
And this is where it ties back into Elixir.
Right.
Is that Paulo, who works at DockYard, is on the NX team. What I want to do is actually distribute the work of rendering the CFD scene. And I want to use NX to do it. And so the sharding work that he's currently doing in NX is primarily motivated because of what's happening with the CFD simulator in the boating in the racing.org project within DockYard. Because if we can pull that off, we have the potential of having an order of magnitude performance improvement on a CFD simulation to speed it up significantly, so that like using a CFD to rate boats currently is not practical because it would take just too long, too much money. But if we had a practical way to do this, now we have a rating system that's going to be trusted, open, fair, and it's going to piss off a lot of older people because their boats are going to get beat. But I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so we actually like we kind of ideated over this for a while, and the solution was always sharding. And then this Mozilla announced that they were doing a artificial intelligence like support like program. And so we applied to it. It's a grant system, and we got in, and we're the only like the only Elixir like group in there. There's about 30 other companies. They're all trying something like with local AI, and our approach has gotten a lot of attention within there because it like I don't know if people follow Apollo on Twitter. Just the other day, he tweeted out some of the progress he's made on the sharding work. If this actually delivers on where we think it can get to, this is like the first time that the NX project is technically ahead of where Python is. Because like NX has been catching up and kind of like covering the pre-existing works in Python to a degree, saying like, you know, they did all the hard work of like figuring out what works and what doesn't, and we're just kind of leveraging that stuff. But there have been kind of like toy versions of distributing machine learning in Python, but doing it for real, doing it at scale, and doing it in a meaningful way requires the work that Paulo's doing. And it's leveraging the beam. It's leveraging all the existing stuff in Erlang to manage a distributed system.
Yeah.
And so it's not simply a matter of like Python saying, okay, we'll just copy what they did. They have to like rewrite Python in order to like really pull it off properly.
True.
And so what this is going to permit though is that like language models are becoming bigger and bigger and more complex to the point where only NVIDIA machines realistically can hold them in memory to run upon. And so NVIDIA has the market locked up in terms of that hardware, like AMD, Apple, they're all trying to catch up. But what if you could actually shard your job up into smaller chunks that can be run on that machine? Because I only have 64 gigabytes of memory, but it's a 100 gigabyte language model. Like that, like in my house alone, I have multiple Apple products with most of them Apple Silicon GPUs in them at this point that are going completely unutilized. So what if we could actually distribute that work locally amongst what I already have? I don't have to go out and spend $1 million on an NVIDIA closet at that point. This democratizes machine learning to a degree where people trying to break into the space now no longer have to actually get that huge amount of money just to even prove out their product. They can use hardware they already have.
And the other thing is, like if you can distribute it over multiple GPUs, you could also buy cheaper GPUs that don't need to have 100 gigabyte of RAM, but smaller, you know, then that might also make it cheaper to run these models.
And there's always trade-offs though, right? So like presumably NVIDIA's hardware is going to be the most efficient in terms of electrical use. And so there could be some waste that occurs. Network latency is also a consideration. I believe some of what Paulo is doing though is actually taking the network topology into account. So like even within these NVIDIA like boxes, the physical distance from like transistor to transistor matters. Like that's what they measure sometimes. And so if you have like two boxes physically separate from one another, the network like distance at that point does impact like times of execution. But if the job is sharded correctly and you take the network topology into account beforehand, Paulo believes that this is something that can be accounted for. So
cool.
We're still going to see. He's been very excited about the progress that's been made, and it could be something that sets Elixir apart in the machine learning space.
Yeah, interesting, definitely. Does that also tie into what I saw Jose tweeting the other day, that he was looking into the high computing
HPC.
HPC.
High performance computing.
High performance computing. Sorry, but HPC, those are like the big supercomputers, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it certainly can. And I think that this came about, we spoke about it briefly. I think that, I don't know if he came to the thought independently or if there was someone that pinged him about it and said like, oh, because of this, it dovetails like perfectly into HPCs. The issue, I think, in that space is just how do we even access one? Like so part of the Mozilla grant program we get access to like a larger network of people, collaborators and stuff. And what's really nice is that Mozilla wants to take an active hand in promoting the NX project. So the grant program ends sometime in December. Paulo, myself, and I believe that's Sean Moriarty, we're going to be going out to San Francisco and doing the demo day at Mozilla about this. Sean and Paulo will be doing most of the talking. I'll just be hanging out because that's like the machine learning stuff. That's beyond me. But I recognize the value of it, and I try to do what I can to enable it as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. And also the grant by Mozilla help with that, I hope.
Well, they are helping with marketing. They want to like make sure it's success. They want to get optics on the project. But one part I was hoping that they could kind of help with is maybe putting us in touch with someone that has access to HPC machines. They kind of do, because there's somebody from the AI Alliance that is at IBM that I've been chatting with. He emails me back like once every 2 weeks, so the through rate's very low. But I'm trying to poke away, and I think he wants to see the outcome of the sharding work first, to like really see where we're at, because these machines there's few of them, and they're pretty much all spoken for in terms of time. And so if they'd be donating that time to somebody, it's time that they're not directly making money off of it.
Right.
So they want to make sure that the time that is put into those machines is going to be like high impact, high value. So I believe that he'll be at the demo day. I'm going to have Paulo and Sean connect them there, and hopefully we can get access to an HPC machine at that point.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it reminds me of the old days. My dad, he also worked with computers in his PhD like 40, 50 years ago. And he told me that he always ran his research like, what was it, punch card projects. He had literally punch cards, and he always had to run them through the night because, during the day, the system was used for by the company that owned it. And then during the night, he could rent that machine for free or for very little money. And then he was running his programs during the night.
Yeah,
so that reminds me again.
Funny you say that. I was actually thinking about those stories the other night, because like my history in programming, like I was telling my son, like back in my day, like we had like discs that we put stuff on. I'm like, This sounds exactly the way that my CS teacher in high school used to talk about, that they would have punch cards. And the story I always remember is that he told me that he spent like a week or some like significant part of time, because you have to put them all in the right order. They all have to be perfect. And he was walking with the machine, he tripped and dropped all of them. Like that's clearly not a problem we deal with today, but this sounds horrible.
Yeah, I still remember when I was a kid, like I had a computer. My dad, he always had to reinstall Windows from the floppy disks every couple of weeks because I was destroying the system with my viruses. So yeah. Now we're still back in that time where actually you have to kind of fight for access to a supercomputer in that regard, to computing power. Yeah.
I mean, that was usually through university level too. They would have universities would lend out their computing power to organizations during certain hours, and then students would always have access to it during other hours. But it's I don't even know like what that. I'm assuming that these HPCs have some sort of like fixed cost per hour, right? At this point, like just saying, here's what it costs us to run it, or here's the opportunity cost for you to use it. And I don't even know what those numbers are. Like, they could be very, very high.
Well, I mean, I have a PhD friend, and she works with the AI, like machine learning models, and she has access to one at her university. And for her, it's free, but it's run by the university. So of course, there's a cost calculation, and not everybody gets like access to it. But if you're in that program, actually, they give you certain computation slots, or so they call it.
Right.
So maybe universities might be a better approach than commercial offerings.
It could. I just don't have any immediate contacts, and I think Jose is trying to as well. I think he has contact at universities, definitely more than my 0 contacts. But I think that if anyone out there that's listening happens to say, "Hey, I have a high performance computing machine right behind me in my garage," great, reach out. Talk
first
to
of all,
Jose.
why?
I'm sure he'll become your best friend immediately.
My first question is why, and the second question is like, can we use it?
Well, here's the answer: why not? Right?
Exactly.
Why not?
Yeah, that's just, I need a 3D printer. Some people need an HPC. Like
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, cool, Brian. It's been 2 hours already, so
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up a little bit. I also don't want to keep you too long. But thank you so much for coming over. You really answered so many questions. It was really interesting with you to dive so deep into LiveView Native and the work that you do at DockYard. And I also in the chat there were quite some people who thanked DockYard a lot for their work on Lumen and everything. So yeah, thank you, Brian, for all your good work you're contributing
Welcome.
to the Elixir community.
Yeah, I mean, this project for me, both bringing LiveView Native and Beacon, Leandro is the lead developer on Beacon, but
Yeah.
seeing it through to release, I tweeted this out, was kind of like my way of making up for not getting Lumen done. I mean, there's multiple reasons why Lumen failed, but I think the most important one was I don't think DockYard was ever the right company to actually bring it to market in the first place. It's too big of a project. I think that a WASI and WASM compilation are important, but I think that this should be in Erlang, and we need to find a way to convince Ericsson to take that on.
Yeah, maybe they have a use case for it, and then it might be interesting to them too. Yeah, but interesting. I mean, also one thing that we mentioned earlier, where like I ask you, is it bad that Elixir goes into all these different areas? And I also agree that it's actually good for Elixir. Because what I love to tell people when they start with Elixir is like, yeah, sure, you can build websites with it, but what about like, what if you want to add an AI model to it and you don't want to use an API, you want to run your own model, right? Oh yeah, here's just like a library you can use, and then oh yeah, you want to play around with nerves, you want to control some some whatever machines from your application. Well, no problem, you can do it in Elixir, right? Like,
well, it's like Sasha Urich's table, right?
Exactly.
Like that is. I've always said that is the most game-changing like graphic that has ever come out of the Erlang Elixir space, and we need to update it too because there's been a few more rows we can add.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it keeps on growing. I mean, there's Flame where you don't need Lambda functions anymore. Like, I already started like double rowing every row, so every row becomes a second row now because there's so many things that I have to add to this table, and yeah.
Know who hates Flame?
Sorry, no.
Know who hates Flame?
Who hates Flame?
I don't know if they hate Flame, but like the whole like serverless stuff took off when all of the cloud providers realized that they can make a ton of money off of it.
Right.
And so they start pouring marketing money into it, and then along comes Chris with Flame that's saying, hey, you don't need to spend as much money. And they're like, whoa, hold on, wait. Yes, you do. You need to spend a lot of money with us.
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy he works for Fly and not for AWS.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I agree with that. I love the direction that's taking. It's just that I think that those are the type of conflicts we're going to start running up against.
All right.
Is that the world of like software development over the past 20 years has been highly optimized by people that have found ways to make money off of inefficiencies.
Right. Yeah.
And when we start to introduce the inefficiencies, we fuck up their business. and so you're going to find that there's going to be pushback on these type of things.
Yeah, true. But I mean, maybe we can use that pushback, and make marketing out of it.
No, we can. It's just like engineers are not good at marketing. No, that's what it comes down to sometimes.
That is something that I've experienced as well. Like I'm always thinking, like in the Elixir space, we like if you look at DHH, of course he's I guess a good engineer. I don't know. I don't know Rails, but
he's an excellent engineer.
Okay, he's an excellent engineer, but I know for sure that he's an excellent marketeer, and like a person who really brings out the message, and he, of course, like people love or hate him, but he really always knows how to sell Rails and Ruby with it. So
I feel like I adopted Rails pre 1.0. I know that we're trying to wrap up. Let me just tell a story real quick.
Sure.
So I was early Rails adopter, and that's like how I got to know Jose and stuff. I didn't actually know Jose and have a conversation with him until after Elixir, but I got aware of him, and that's his experience in Rails kind of pulled me into Elixir, as did a few other things. And also why I went to Ember, because of Yehuda was on the Rails core team. But like there's a few like tech influencers out there right now that are throwing shade at DHH because they don't like the way that he says things, or because they can get a response from him and it's fodder.
Yeah.
The thing is that like DHH was like Babe Ruth in his heyday, like in terms of like being able to just articulate points in a way that technical people and business people could get to. And No, I won't say Babe Ruth. He was Mike Tyson. Like he was Mike Tyson in his heyday. And it seems my perception is that he kind of took a break from that for a few years.
Hmm.
And now he's coming back to it. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's excellent. And the other thing too is that I think that the direction and some of the things he's currently talking about. If you go out and watch Rails World
Yeah,
this year,
the
it's a really
keynote.
good presentation, his keynote. But
Hmm.
Rails World 2023 is amazing. His keynote, he speaks to all the problems that I think that we actually have in Elixir space too.
Hmm.
And I think that Elixir and Ruby, at least from a high level perspective, should team up in that we're both trying to push forward the same ideas on
Right.
operational complexity reduction. We
Hmm.
don't need these insane front ends with JavaScript.
Hmm.
It's just that we have differences on like, you know, scalability and, one language versus another. But
Yeah.
those are implementation details. The high level concerns, I think that both of our ecosystems are in perfect alignment on, and he did an amazing job of articulating them.
Hmm.
And so for those that doubt DHH, I'd say watch out because I think that it seems to me that he's starting to like come back into the fold, and he's like, okay, I'm going to start like really turning on what I can do again. And
Yeah.
he's amazing at it.
He's great. I mean, the points he's making, he makes them really well and they're accurate. Like running your own. I mean, just doing the thing that you say, well, I'm gonna move away from all the cloud providers. I'm gonna run it on my own machine. Like a lot of people talk about it, but he actually just does it, and he shows
Yeah.
to the world that it works and he saves money with it. I mean, like, is it good or is it bad for your company? Well, it depends on your company, right? I mean, there were other people who also said, well, if I hire one engineer to run the DevOps here in my machine, I already lose all the benefit that I get from not being on AWS or something. But still, like the point he's making is like it is possible. Like you have that option, you don't always
Yeah.
have to run everything on AWS. You can also have other options, and I think that is important there. And
And the irony is that Rails enabled that whole like ecosystem to come up, right? So like
mhm,
through platform as a service architecture with Heroku, cloud-based computing really took off under Rails. And at the time, it was significantly less expensive. But then you have some, idiot with an MBA and a spreadsheet come
yeah.
along and say, "Hey, we got this whole like ecosystem by the balls. Let's just
Mm,
start bringing our prices up while we're not investing in the hardware." And now it's completely lopsided. It's gotten to be more expensive in many ways, and he's completely right.
yeah, true. One fun story that I also would like to add is like, what was it? Walmart, right? Walmart is one of the biggest
Mm.
cloud providers in the US. I didn't know that, but they build up their own infrastructure in their own Walmarts and in their own regional centers and everything. And then
Mm.
they realized, oh, we have so much infrastructure, so many servers we don't really use. We can just rent them out. And now you have the Walmart cloud that is
I didn't know that.
yeah, that is competing with AWS and so on. And you can literally host your servers with Walmart if you wanted to. And
Something seems wrong with that, though, right? Like
somehow it feels
Walmart
weird,
quality
right?
servers.
But that is some stuff. I mean, if they hadn't invested in their own infrastructure, now they wouldn't be able to sell that out and
Right,
actually make a
right.
profit with it. So
I mean, it's kind of the same with Fly. Like Fly isn't
true.
just reselling AWS, or they're not doing that at all. They built their own data
Yeah.
centers.
Yeah, exactly. And I was at first I thought, is that really what you should be doing? But now they also have all these options where they can add them all together to private networks because they have access directly to the machines and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, that
I just wish that their database tiers were better.
yeah. Well,
I
I
think
mean they have
everyone kind of
Superbase
feels the same
now,
way.
but it's already better than nothing. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. All right, Brian. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really, really insightful. And yeah, maybe one day we have the pleasure of racing boats against each other.
Very excellent.
That would be great, right?
Anytime.
All right. All right, Brian. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, folks. That has been the interview with Brian. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, if you want to rewatch any of this, it's on YouTube. Twitch still has it. We even streamed to Algora for the first time. And Algora here, that's me. I'm live right now. And this is written in Elixir, Algora, actually. We looked at it for our little project with the Twitch clone. And they're pretty cool people. So yeah, go watch them. And that also brings me to the end of this live stream. It's been a bit more than 2 hours, and I hope you learn a lot. I hope you had some fun, and yeah, it was great to have Brian on, right? I mean, like I wasn't 100% sure how it would go with having like an interview live, so to say, but I think it went quite well, and I certainly learned a lot. And I hope you have a better understanding of LiveView Native as well, and what DockYard does and everything. And it's just cool to see, and like how many projects they're involved, right? I mean, LiveView Native is one of them, but then you also have the NX project with Paolo, and you have Beacon, which is a CMS. Actually, here the Beacon CMS, and that also hopes to be, a way of quickly creating your own blog and everything. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all from my side for this week. I wish you all a very happy weekend. Thank you for stopping by. And yeah, follow me on all the socials. You can buy my video courses on indiecourses.com. I also have a blog at peterrick.com. And I will see you next Monday again for probably LiveView Native again. Let's just see. Like, let's continue to work on that a little bit. Build our little habit tracker. Let's see how far we get. But yeah, I feel pretty good about it now talking to Brian. He seems to really know what he's doing. So yeah, I will see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend, and thank you for joining today.